The fluorescent lights of Synergy Solutions hummed their usual monotonous tune, a low-grade thrumming that was the soundtrack to my existence. For 12 years, I, Eleanor Vance, had been the quiet conductor of this corporate orchestra, ensuring every note was in tune, every instrument played its part, and no one ever noticed the maestro. I was the senior operations manager, which, in plain English, meant I was the grease in the gears, the duct tape on the leaky pipes, and the invisible hand that kept the entire chaotic machinery from grinding to a catastrophic halt. My domain was the realm of forgotten details, the quarterly budget spreadsheets that magically balanced themselves, the travel arrangements that anticipated every flight delay, the vendor contracts that always had a hidden clause that saved our bacon when some C-suite buffoon inevitably signed something they didn't understand. Mark Jenkins, my boss, was none of those things. He was the polar opposite of meticulous. He was all bluster, buzzwords, and bespoke suits, a man whose primary skill seemed to be inhaling air and exhaling corporate jargon. His idea of planning was choosing a tie that clashed less with his ego. He lived in a world of abstract concepts, while I lived in the trenches of practical execution. And today, Mark had apparently decided to invent a new concept, blaming me for his own catastrophic screw-up. It started, as most of Mark's disasters did, with a vague, panicked email from him at 6:45 a.m. Subject: Urgent. Client crisis. Need immediate resolution. My stomach, which had been enjoying a rare moment of peace before my first cup of coffee, did a triple somersault. I navigated the digital minefield of his inbox, past the 100. Circling back on this. And let's ideate offline. Emails, to find the actual terrifying kernel of truth. The keynote speaker for our flagship annual conference, the one Mark had personally courted for 6 months, the one who was supposed to catapult Synergy Solutions into the stratosphere, had cancelled. With 48 hours' notice. Mark, of course, had been informed yesterday evening, and instead of calling me, his operations manager, the person who literally managed crisis resolution for a living, he'd apparently spent the evening drinking expensive single malt scotch and weaving a tale of woe for his equally clueless marketing VP. Now, at the crack of dawn, the fallout landed squarely on my desk, or rather, on my virtual inbox, because Mark believed physical proximity to problems was a sign of weakness. I spent the next 3 hours in a frantic, caffeine-fueled whirlwind. I combed through my carefully curated database of industry contacts, my digital Rolodex of backup speakers, my meticulously organized list of speakers for past events who had been well received. I cross-referenced availability, speaking fees, and subject matter relevance. I even pulled up the contracts for the last 3 conferences, just in case there was some obscure clause about speaker replacement. It was the kind of deep dive that made my eye twitch, but it was what I did. It was who I was. By 10 a.m., I had 3 viable options, one of whom was a rising star in the industry, a brilliant analyst whose recent book had been a bestseller. I drafted polite professional emails to each, outlining the opportunity and the urgency. I attached a brief bio and a synopsis of their relevant work. Then, I sent the whole package to Mark, along with a concise summary of the situation, my proposed solutions, and a clear action plan for next steps. I attached my findings in a neatly formatted PDF, complete with footnotes referencing my sources and contingency plans. It was, if I do say so myself, a masterpiece of operational problem-solving. Naturally, Mark ignored it. Instead, at 10:30 a.m., he summoned me to his corner office. The door, a hulking monolith of polished mahogany, swung open with a dramatic flourish. Inside, the air was thick with the cloying scent of his expensive cologne and the faint but unmistakable aroma of last night's scotch. Mark was behind his gargantuan desk, which was conspicuously free of any actual work, save for a single unopened bottle of sparkling water. He was already wearing that look, the one that said, "I'm about to deliver a searing indictment of your incompetence, and you'd better have a damn good apology ready." "Eleanor," he began, his voice dripping with faux disappointment, "we have a situation." I stood by his desk, arms crossed, my posture radiating a calm that was as carefully constructed as one of my budget spreadsheets. "I'm aware, Mark. I received your email. He waved a dismissive hand as if swatting away a fly. Yes, well, that's just the tip of the iceberg. The keynote speaker. Cancelled. And frankly, Eleanor, this is unacceptable. This is a colossal failure on your part. My internal temperature gauge, which had been hovering around a polite 70 degrees, instantly jumped to a sizzling 90. My part? I asked, my voice dangerously level. Mark, I was informed of the cancellation at 6:45 a.m. I immediately initiated contingency protocols. I have 3 viable candidates ready to step in, with bios and proposed topics all compiled and sent to you at 10 a.m. He leaned back, a smug smile spreading across his face. It was the smile of a man who had just discovered he could breathe fire and was contemplating setting his own kingdom ablaze. Contingency protocols? Eleanor, this isn't about scrambling to fill a slot. This is about foresight. This is about ownership. When a problem arises, I take ownership. I address it. I don't just delegate it to lower-level staff and hope for the best. This reflects poorly on me, and by extension, on the entire department. He paused, savoring the manufactured drama. Frankly, Eleanor, this is the kind of oversight I expect from someone who's, well, content to just keep the wheels turning. But this conference is our biggest opportunity to drive synergy and disrupt the market paradigm. We need proactive leadership, not reactive administration. Reactive administration? I, Eleanor Vance, who had personally negotiated the software licenses that saved this company millions, who had single-handedly prevented a major data breach last year by noticing a single misplaced comma in a security protocol, it was being called a reactive administrator. It was like calling Michelangelo a doodle artist. Mark, I said, my voice a little colder now, the temperature gauge nudging into the triple digits. The initial oversight of securing a speaker with a backup plan, or at least vetting their contractual obligations more thoroughly, was your responsibility. My role was to manage the logistics and, yes, to have contingency plans in place, which I do. I have provided you with those solutions. If you wish to delegate the decision-making on which candidate to select, I am happy to facilitate that. Otherwise, my proposals stand. His smugness wavered, replaced by a flicker of annoyance. He clearly wasn't used to being challenged, especially not by someone who spoke in facts rather than feelings. Delegate? Eleanor, this isn't about delegation. This is about leadership. And frankly, your performance here has been disappointing. It's clear you're not operating at the strategic level this role demands. It's time we had a serious conversation about your future here. The words hung in the air, heavy and sharp as broken glass. My future. It was the corporate euphemism for, you're fired. And the kicker? He was firing me for his failure to anticipate a speaker cancellation. The sheer audacity of it was breathtaking. It was like a chef who burns the soufflé and then fires the sous chef for not having a backup soufflé already baked and ready to go. I took a slow, deep breath, the kind that calms the racing heart and sharpens the focus. I wasn't going to yell. I wasn't going to cry. I was going to be Eleanor Vance, Senior Operations Manager, and I was going to be professional, even if he wasn't. Mark? I said, my voice now unnervingly calm. I understand. If you feel my performance has not met expectations, then I respect your decision. He seemed almost surprised by my lack of a dramatic outburst. His smug expression returned, a little shaky around the edges. Good. I'm glad you understand, Eleanor. We'll have HR send over the separation documents. Please ensure all company property is returned by end of day. Keys, badge, laptop, the usual. Of course, I replied, the word feeling like grit in my mouth. And Mark, regarding the conference speaker, I've prepared a full handover of all communications and potential candidates to your assistant. You'll find them in your email, clearly labeled. I didn't mention the exhaustive notes I'd made, the hours I'd spent vetting each option, the carefully documented risks and benefits. Let him think it was just a few hurried emails. As I turned to leave his opulent office, he added, almost as an afterthought, oh, and Eleanor, your final paycheck will include severance, as per your contract. Standard procedure. Standard procedure. My contract. A faint, almost imperceptible smile touched my lips. Mark, in his infinite wisdom and ego, had just handed me a loaded gun. He had no idea. I walked back to my cubicle, a stark white box in a sea of identical white boxes, each a tiny mausoleum of forgotten ambitions. My desk was neat, almost minimalist, a testament to my controlled environment. My laptop screen was still displaying the beautifully organized PDF of my proposed speaker solutions. I closed it. Then, with deliberate, unhurried movements, I opened a different file. It was a personal document, a meticulously compiled dossier titled Synergy Solutions, Mark Jenkins, Operational Blind Spots, and Personal Quirks. This wasn't about spite. Not entirely. It was about balance. It was about justice. It was about the quiet, often thankless work of people like me being recognized and the people who trampled over us being, well, taught a lesson. For 12 years, I'd been the administrative backbone of this company. I knew its schedules, its systems, its contracts, and I knew Mark Jenkins. I knew his routines, his preferences, his deeply ingrained habits, and, crucially, his vulnerabilities. I remembered the time Mark had a panic attack because his preferred Italian restaurant was booked solid for a power lunch with a potential investor. He'd ended up at a greasy spoon diner, complaining about the ambiance and the lack of authentic bolognese, the investor looking utterly bewildered. That had been a close call, but it had taught me something valuable. Mark's power lunches weren't just about business. They were about appearances. They were about projecting an image of success, of being connected, of being in the know. And then there was his wife, Clara. Mark mentioned her often, usually in hushed tones when he thought no one was listening. She was apparently a woman of exquisite taste, a connoisseur of fine dining, with a particular fondness for a small, charming French bistro called Le Petit Jardin, just a few blocks from our office. Mark had once confided, in a moment of drunken bonhomie at an office holiday party, that Clara's birthday dinner there had been the highlight of his year. He'd even complained, in his usual hyperbolic fashion, about how difficult it was to get a reservation there. I began to type, my fingers flying across the keyboard with a precision that would have impressed Mark had he ever bothered to look. I wasn't composing a resignation letter. I was drafting an email. An internal email, ostensibly from Operations Department, to Mark's executive assistant, a perpetually flustered woman named Brenda. Dear Brenda, I typed following up on Mr. Jenkins's request for his upcoming power lunch on Thursday. I've secured a reservation for him at Gourmet Grill House at 1 p.m. It's a highly rated establishment, known for its excellent steak and discreet atmosphere, perfect for important business discussions. I've also noted its proximity to the financial district. Please confirm if this works with Mr. Jenkins's schedule. I paused, looking at the words. Gourmet Grill House, a perfectly respectable, if somewhat unremarkable, steakhouse. It was well reviewed, had private rooms, and was generally considered fine, absolutely fine. But Gourmet Grill House was located directly across the street from Le Petit Jardin, and Thursday, as I knew from my meticulous internal calendar tracking of employee birthdays, anniversaries, and significant personal events, because someone had to keep track of the human element in this sterile corporate hive, was Clara Jenkins' birthday. A slow, satisfied smile spread across my face. It wasn't the triumphant, fist-pumping kind of smile. It was the quiet, knowing smile of a chess player who has just made a move that, while seemingly innocuous, will lead to an inevitable, devastating checkmate. Mark wanted a power lunch. He wanted to impress. He wanted to appear as though he was in control. Well, he was about to get a very powerful lesson indeed. A lesson delivered not by me, but by the sheer, inconvenient, unavoidable proximity of his wife's favorite restaurant and the inevitable realization of what day it was. I didn't feel anger anymore, just a cold, clinical sense of purpose. Mark Jenkins had mistaken my quiet competence for subservience. He had berated me for his own colossal failure. He had, in his arrogance, believed he could simply dismiss me. He was wrong. Very, very wrong. I saved the draft. Then I opened a new document. This one was titled The Jenkins Gambit. And within its digital pages, I began to meticulously catalog every detail, every possibility, every consequence. I wasn't just leaving Synergy Solutions, I was leaving a meticulously planned legacy of disruption. The wheels were already in motion. Mark had made his mistake. Now, it was time for him to face the music, and the symphony, I suspected, was about to get very loud and very personal. The next morning dawned with the crisp, impersonal efficiency that I had always strived to instill in Synergy Solutions. But for Mark Jenkins, it was likely dawning with the muted panic of a man who'd woken up with a hangover and a gnawing sense of unease. I, on the other hand, felt remarkably serene. My apartment, usually a sanctuary of controlled order, was a testament to my meticulous preparation. Every piece of paper, every email, every obscure contract clause was digitized, cross-referenced, and meticulously filed. My Jenkins Gambit dossier was a work of art, a digital tapestry woven from years of observation and an intimate understanding of corporate bureaucracy. The morning commute, usually a soul-crushing crawl through traffic, felt almost pleasant. I listened to a podcast on advanced negotiation tactics, mentally rehearsing my dialogue, refining the precise tone that conveyed calm competence, not vengeful glee. My personal phone, blessedly free of corporate oversight, buzzed with a series of increasingly frantic texts from Sarah, a junior marketing associate I'd always been fond of. "Eleanor, help." The first one read, at 9:15 a.m. Mark's in a total panic. The keynote speaker canceled, and he's been emailing everyone and their mother, demanding solutions. He's blaming Brenda for not confirming some last-minute thing, but it's definitely not her fault. She's literally crying. My lips curved into a faint smile. Brenda, bless her soul, was just collateral damage in Mark's ego-driven firestorm. A follow-up text arrived at 9:47 a.m. Okay, now Mark's yelling at the catering company because they misunderstood his vision for the lunch. Apparently he wanted something disruptive, and they ordered mini quiches. He's saying it's a complete operational breakdown. He just fired someone from catering on the spot. Said they were unaligned with the brand Synergy. Fired someone from catering for quiches. The sheer absurdity of it almost made me laugh out loud. I resisted. Professionalism, Eleanor. Professionalism. The true tremor, however, came at 10:32 a.m. A mass email landed in my personal inbox, forwarded by Sarah, who had, thankfully, maintained a modicum of common sense. Subject: Urgent, Conference Coordination Crisis, Action Required. The sender was Mark Jenkins. The recipients, the entire Synergy Solutions leadership team, the marketing department, the event planning committee, and, inexplicably, a handful of external vendor contacts who had no bearing on the situation. The email was a masterpiece of deflection and self-pity. Mark waxed lyrical about the unforeseeable challenges, the unprecedented logistical complexities, and the lack of proactive support he had received. He lamented the potential damage to Synergy Solutions' reputation, all while subtly implying that he, the valiant leader, was valiantly battling against the tide of incompetence. He even mentioned in a particularly poignant sentence how he'd been looking forward to a constructive and inspiring power lunch to strategize solutions. A lunch that was now, of course, in jeopardy. It was the perfect domino, a perfectly placed domino ready to fall. I waited. Patience, I reminded myself, was a virtue forged in the fires of bureaucratic frustration. I let the panic build. I let the internal chaos at Synergy Solutions ferment. I knew that Mark, in his desperation, would eventually have to acknowledge the gaping void left by my departure. He couldn't possibly manage even the simplest of operational tasks without me. And the conference, his pet project, the very thing he'd used to justify my dismissal, was now teetering on the brink of disaster. At precisely 11:17 a.m., my personal phone rang. The caller ID displayed a familiar yet unwelcome number, Mark Jenkins. I let it go to voicemail. I wasn't going to pick up. Not yet. Let him stew. Let him understand the depth of his error. A minute later, a text message popped up. "Eleanor, this is Mark. We need to talk. Call me as soon as possible. This is critical." I finally picked up. Mark, I said, my voice smooth and professional, tinged with just the right amount of polite concern. To what do I owe the unexpected pleasure? There was a frantic inhale on the other end. Eleanor, thank God. Look, there's been a situation, a crisis. With the conference, you know how at Island things happen. And frankly, we need your expertise. I didn't respond immediately. I let the silence stretch, allowing him to dig himself deeper. The sound of his agitated breathing was almost musical. Eleanor? He prompted, his voice wavering. Mark, I said, my voice now a little cooler, the concern replaced by a hint of weary resignation. I'm afraid I'm no longer at Synergy Solutions. As you recall, you terminated my employment yesterday morning. A strangled sound erupted from his end. Yes, well, that was a misunderstanding. A hasty decision. Look, I'm prepared to rectify that. We need you back. Immediately. The conference is falling apart. The speaker is gone, the catering is a disaster, and frankly, I'm drowning here. He was unraveling, a spectacular display of ego crumbling under the weight of reality. The man who had berated me for a mistake he made was now begging for my help, completely oblivious to the exquisite irony of the situation. Mark, I said, choosing my words carefully. I appreciate the offer, but I've already moved on. I've made other arrangements. Other arrangements? He spluttered. What other arrangements? This is Synergy Solutions. This is your life's work. My life's work, I echoed softly, was keeping things running smoothly, and I did that. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have a very important lunch engagement. I hung up before he could respond. I knew he would call again. He would offer anything, but my meticulous preparation wasn't about getting my job back. It was about making him understand. The next few hours were a masterclass in escalating chaos as relayed through Sarah's increasingly frantic text messages. At 12:05 p.m. Oh my God, Eleanor. Mark is losing it. He's supposed to be at his power lunch now, but he's still in the office. He can't find the reservation confirmation for Gourmet Grill House. Brenda is flipping out, she doesn't have it. He's yelling at security to find the missing document. He thinks someone stole it. At 12:30 p.m. He's running down the street. He looks so ridiculous. He's wearing his best suit, but he's sweating like he ran a marathon. He's muttering about operational sabotage and incompetent staff. At 1:05 p.m., he's at the restaurant, but he's not in Gourmet Grill House. Sarah just saw him through the window. He's staring at something across the street. I think he's at the wrong place. What happened? My heart gave a little flutter, not of malice, but of quiet satisfaction. The trap was sprung. I was, in fact, enjoying a delightful lunch. My table at Le Petit Jardin had been secured months ago, not for a business meeting but for a personal celebration, a quiet acknowledgement of my own resilience. The ambient chatter of French conversation, the clinking of glasses, the aroma of freshly baked bread, it was a world away from the panicked energy of Synergy Solutions. Then, my personal phone buzzed again. A message from an unknown number. Eleanor, what is the meaning of this? Where is my power lunch? This is an utter disgrace. My wife, she saw me, she's waving, she thinks I'm an idiot. You will pay for this. The message was signed, simply, MJ. I didn't reply. I didn't need to. I looked out the window, across the bustling street, and saw him. Mark Jenkins, standing on the sidewalk in front of Gourmet Grill House, his expensive suit looking decidedly out of place, his face a mask of bewildered fury. He was staring directly at Le Petit Jardin, where, I imagined, his wife Clara was currently enjoying her birthday lunch, perhaps with a few friends, completely oblivious to the corporate drama unfolding just a few feet away. He had wanted to impress. He had wanted to project power. And all he had managed to do was expose his own spectacular incompetence to his wife, and likely, to half the financial district. The Gourmet Grill House reservation was a phantom, a carefully crafted illusion that had dissolved the moment he realized he was looking at the wrong restaurant. The real power wasn't in a steakhouse, it was in the intimate, charming French bistro, a place he couldn't even get into, now filled with his wife and her friends, while he stood on the street, looking like a lost puppy. The true leverage wasn't in contracts or clauses, not yet. It was in the exquisite, painful intersection of ego and personal life. It was in making a man realize that his perceived authority meant nothing when it came to the one thing he truly cared about, his image, particularly in front of his wife. A follow-up text arrived from Sarah at 2:10 p.m. "Eleanor, the office is in lockdown. Mark's back, he's furious. He's yelling about treason and operational sabotage. Security has been alerted. He's demanding to know who confirmed the lunch reservation. Brenda is terrified. He threatened to sue the catering company for emotional distress. What did you do?" I smiled, a genuine, unrestrained smile this time, as I signaled the waiter for the check. I hadn't done anything, not directly. I had simply presented the circumstances, the facts, and let Mark's own arrogance unravel him. The real work, however, was still to come. The seeds of chaos had been sown. Now, it was time to watch them bloom. The next few days were a blur of escalating panic at Synergy Solutions. Mark, in his newfound paranoia, had initiated a company-wide loyalty audit. Everyone was being questioned, their communications scrutinized. He was convinced I had an inside accomplice. Sarah, bless her, was terrified. She sent me increasingly coded messages. System glitches are multiplying. Key client contracts suddenly missing crucial appendices. Mark's threatening to dissolve departments if traders aren't identified. The most telling message arrived on Tuesday, precisely 4 days after my dismissal. It was a frantic voice note from Sarah. "Eleanor, you have to call them back. HR just sent out a memo. It's bad. Apparently, the entire database for our premium client accounts is corrupted. Like, completely gone. They can't access anything. Clients are starting to call, threatening to sue. Mark is in a state. He's been on the phone with legal for hours. They're talking about unforeseen data loss and external interference. Everyone's terrified. They're saying it's a disaster. It's like someone just deleted years of work." The timing was no coincidence. My Jenkins Gambit dossier contained a meticulously documented account of Mark's personal vendettas, his habit of making unilateral decisions without proper documentation or legal oversight, and a particularly damning record of his insistence on using a third-party, low-security cloud storage solution for proprietary client data. A solution he'd personally chosen because it was cheap and easy to use, despite my repeated warnings about its inadequacy. I had, of course, backed up every single piece of data from that compromised system onto a secure, encrypted drive of my own, long before my exit. The crucial detail? I had programmed a subtle, time-delayed script into the system. It wasn't malicious in its intent, but in its effect. Upon detecting an unauthorized termination event, that is to say, my dismissal, and after a predetermined waiting period, the script would initiate a data integrity check. This check, designed to flag anomalies, would, in this specific instance, interpret the absence of its administrator, me, as a critical error, triggering a cascade that would effectively render the entire client database inaccessible without a specific administrator-level override code, a code that, naturally, only I possessed. The emails from Synergy Solutions' legal department started flooding my personal inbox on Wednesday morning. Polite at first, then increasingly urgent. They spoke of unforeseen technical difficulties, data corruption, and the urgent need for clarification regarding system administration protocols. They were fishing, desperately hoping for a clue, a hint, anything that would explain the sudden digital void. I ignored them, let them flounder, let them feel the cold grip of consequence. Then came the phone call that I had been waiting for. It was from Mr. Abernathy, the head of Synergy Solutions' legal department. His voice, usually a calm, measured baritone, was strained, bordering on panicked. "Miss Vance," he began, his tone a far cry from the polite formality of his earlier emails. We need to discuss the current situation at Synergy Solutions. It's dire." I was at my kitchen table, sipping a perfectly brewed cup of Earl Grey. "Mr. Abernathy," I replied, my voice calm and steady. I'm afraid I'm no longer associated with Synergy Solutions. My employment was terminated yesterday morning. He cleared his throat, a sound that was more of a choke. Yes, we understand that, Miss Vance. However, the current data crisis, it's unprecedented. Our entire client database appears to be inaccessible. We believe it may be related to the system protocols, and frankly, we suspect your departure may have triggered something. He was practically begging now. He knew, or at least strongly suspected, that my departure had not been the clean break Mark had envisioned. Indeed, I said, allowing a subtle hint of something akin to amusement to color my tone. It seems the system you entrusted to me, Mark's preferred easy-to-use third-party solution, has taken my departure as a sign to recalibrate. Abernathy's voice dropped to a near whisper. Miss Vance, our servers are showing a critical system alert. It's a data integrity lock. It requires an administrator override code. We've tried everything. The provider is no help. They're saying only the original administrator can reset it. I let the silence hang for a moment, the weight of his desperation palpable. The administrator override code was, of course, a string of characters I had personally created, a complex, multi-layered password that would take a team of IT experts weeks to crack. A little something I'd put in place for precisely this kind of unforeseen and frankly deserved eventuality. Mr. Abernathy, I said, my voice now firm and deliberate, the calm facade cracking to reveal the steel beneath. It appears that Synergy Solutions' most valuable asset, its client data, has been securely stored, and the key to that vault is currently in my possession. The silence on his end was profound, a heavy blanket of dawning realization. He finally understood. Mark had not just fired an employee. He had fired the architect of his digital empire, the guardian of his most critical data. And I hadn't just left. I had taken the blueprints with me. What do you want, Miss Vance? He finally managed, his voice barely a whisper. The question hung in the air, a surrender. The trap had been sprung. Now, it was time to lay out the terms of engagement. And Mark Jenkins was about to learn that the real power wasn't in a corner office or a bespoke suit. It was in the meticulous, often invisible, work of those he so carelessly discarded. The phone call from Mr. Abernathy was a study in controlled desperation. His voice, once the measured baritone of seasoned legal counsel, was now reedy, tinged with the distinct scent of corporate panic. He spoke of catastrophic data loss, of client exodus, of an impending market collapse. He'd even, in a moment of near hysteria, mentioned that Mark Jenkins was threatening to sue the cloud provider, the IT department, and anyone else he could think of, for gross negligence. Miss Vance, Abernathy pleaded, his tone shifting from formality to outright supplication. We are in a critical situation. The board is convening an emergency session. Mark is in a state. The company's future is at stake. We need access to the client database. You are the only one who can resolve this. I listened patiently, swirling the amber liquid in my glass. I hadn't touched my wine until this moment. This was the culmination. This was the checkmate. Mr. Abernathy, I said, my voice deliberately calm, a stark contrast to his evident distress. As you know, my employment was terminated yesterday morning. You specifically requested confirmation that all company property, including data, was returned. I provided that confirmation. A nervous cough. Yes, well, we believed that was comprehensive. However, it appears there was an oversight. An oversight, I repeated, a ghost of a smile playing on my lips. Indeed. It seems Mark Jenkins' approach to human resources management has had some unforeseen operational consequences. Miss Vance, we understand you may feel wronged, Abernathy continued, his voice now tinged with a desperate attempt at negotiation. We are prepared to discuss a resolution. Whatever it takes. Whatever it takes, I echoed. The words hung in the air, pregnant with possibility. This was it, the moment of truth. So, I said, leaning back in my chair, the weight of years of overlooked labor finally lifting. Let's discuss the terms of this resolution, Mr. Abernathy. I have two proposals for Synergy Solutions, Consider them. Options A and B. I paused, allowing him to brace himself. The silence on his end was heavy, punctuated only by the faint sound of his rapid breathing. Option A, I began, my voice measured and precise, is the narrow escape hatch. Synergy Solutions agrees to reinstate me as Senior Operations Manager, with a full reversal of the termination, a written apology from Mr. Jenkins to be read into the company-wide minutes, and a significant salary increase reflecting my true value and the cost of my wrongful dismissal. Furthermore, all my previous responsibilities are to be restored, and Mr. Jenkins is to undergo mandatory executive leadership training, focusing on interpersonal skills and basic operational competence. This option ensures the immediate restoration of client data and allows the company to move forward, albeit with a newfound appreciation for qualified personnel. Abernathy let out a shaky breath. That sounds manageable, Miss Vance. Reinstatement, an apology. We can likely make that happen. And the training. And then there is option B. I continued, my voice taking on a more decisive tone. This is the nuclear option. Synergy Solutions agrees to a mutually beneficial separation package. This package would include a substantial severance payment, significantly exceeding any standard contractual obligation, to compensate for the emotional distress and reputational damage incurred by my wrongful termination. It would also include a clause whereby Synergy Solutions relinquishes all claims to any intellectual property, proprietary algorithms, or data that I may have developed or contributed to during my tenure, which, as you know, is extensive. Furthermore, this option would involve a formal public acknowledgement of Synergy Solutions' operational failures, as detailed in my comprehensive report, which I would then submit to the relevant industry regulatory bodies, including a full audit of their data security protocols and management practices. The silence that followed was deafening. Option B was not just a financial hit, it was a death knell for Synergy Solutions' reputation. It would trigger investigations, expose their vulnerabilities, and likely cripple their client base. Finally, Abernathy's voice, small and strained, broke the quiet. Miss Vance, option B, that would be catastrophic. The board would never agree. The financial repercussions. And what about the repercussions of losing all your client data, Mr. Abernathy? I countered gently. Or facing regulatory fines and lawsuits, or having your incompetent leadership publicly dissected? Mark Jenkins' ego has put this company on the brink. Option A is the path of least resistance. Option B is the path of accountability. A long pause. I could picture Abernathy, his tie loosened, his face pale, picturing the chaos Mark had already unleashed. He knew, deep down, that only one path offered a chance of survival. We need to speak with the board, Abernathy said, his voice barely audible. Can you give us an hour? An hour it is, I replied, taking a slow sip of my wine. The hour that followed was a masterclass in corporate damage control. My phone buzzed with updates from Sarah, who had become my eyes and ears within the panicked walls of Synergy Solutions. The executive team was in a frenzy. Mark Jenkins apparently had been informed of the wrong restaurant incident and was now in a complete meltdown, accusing everyone from the valet attendant to the pastry chef of conspiring against him. The news of the data loss had spread like wildfire, and clients were already calling, their threats escalating from angry emails to legal summons. At precisely 3 p.m., Mr. Abernathy called back. His voice was different this time. Resigned, defeated. Miss Vance, he began, the desperation still there, but now tempered with a grim acceptance. We have reviewed your proposals. Option A is the only viable path forward for the company. The board has agreed. Mr. Jenkins has been informed. He is not pleased. I can imagine, I said dryly. He has agreed to the terms, Abernathy continued, his voice heavy. He will read a statement of apology during the emergency board meeting this afternoon. He will also be taking a leave of absence, effective immediately. The company will issue a press release regarding his strategic sabbatical. You will be reinstated as Senior Operations Manager. Your salary will be adjusted accordingly. And the leadership training, that will be mandatory for all senior executives, including Mr. Jenkins, of course. Excellent, I replied, a sense of quiet satisfaction washing over me. It wasn't about retribution, it was about restoration. Restoration of order, of competence, and of my own dignity. And the data, Miss Vance? Abernathy pressed, his voice filled with a fragile hope. When can we expect access to the client database? Once my reinstatement is officially processed and my access credentials are restored, I said, a final touch of leverage. I will initiate the data recovery protocols. It will take some time to ensure the integrity of the system, but within 24 to 48 hours, your client data should be fully accessible. Thank you, Miss Vance, Abernathy said, his voice filled with genuine relief. Thank you, you have saved us. I hung up the phone. The wine tasted sweeter now. The quiet efficiency of my apartment felt earned. Mark Jenkins had tried to silence me, to dismiss me, to blame me for his own failings. Instead, he had inadvertently provided me with the perfect, irrefutable leverage. He had mistaken my quiet diligence for subservience, and in doing so, had unleashed a force he couldn't comprehend. The next morning, the Synergy Solutions internal portal displayed a new announcement, an important message regarding operational leadership. It detailed my reinstatement, the strategic sabbatical of Mark Jenkins, and the mandatory executive leadership training. The apology from Mark, though brief and clearly coerced, was included in the company-wide minutes, a tiny bitter pill for him to swallow. I returned to my office not as the meek operative Mark had dismissed, but as the one who held the keys. The data was restored. The clients were appeased. The immediate crisis was averted. But the underlying rot of Mark's leadership had been exposed. He was on a sabbatical, a euphemism for his impending termination and likely legal fallout. The mandatory leadership training was a bureaucratic purgatory designed to keep him occupied while his career imploded. As for me, I was back. Not just as senior operations manager, but as the quiet, unassuming powerhouse who had once again saved the day, and in doing so had finally, unequivocally, asserted her value. The story of Eleanor Vance and the ill-fated power lunch would become a legend whispered in the hallowed halls of Synergy Solutions. A cautionary tale about the perils of underestimating the person who actually does the work. This wasn't just a revenge story. It was a masterclass in corporate justice. It proved that sometimes, the most satisfying takedowns are the ones delivered with precision, documentation, and a deep understanding of your opponent's deepest insecurities. So, if you've ever felt overlooked, underestimated, or unjustly dismissed, remember Eleanor Vance. Remember that your quiet competence is your greatest weapon. And if you enjoyed watching Ego Crash and Burn, hit that like button and subscribe for more tales of corporate comeuppance. Because when the system tries to silence you, sometimes the loudest statement you can make is by simply knowing your worth, and making them pay for not recognizing it sooner. The real power, after all, lies not in the spotlight, but in the meticulous planning done in the shadows. And my shadows, it turned out, were perfectly lit.